All right, welcome back to Firewall. I'm your host, Bradley Tusk. We're recording live from PET Knitwear here on Orchard Street in New York City, which is where we're always recording from, but I was just in a meeting where I was reminded to say that, so we did it.
And it's not technically live, right? Because people aren't listening to this
alive.
as we're talking. We are alive,
Yes.
but how could we be anything else?
Unless it was like a seance podcast. I bet there has to be a seance podcast.
Okay, we're live from PET.
Right, we're not the seance. If you're looking for the seance podcast, that's down the street and to the left.
I'm not going to be a critic. We're live.
Anyway,
from PET.
here we are, Tuesday episode. Hugo and Cory are both here. So
Good morning.
Hello, Cory. Hello, Hugo. Nice to see you both. And we're going to talk today mainly about, every year we do a column and a podcast with our kind of tech political predictions for the coming year. And it's what we think will happen around the intersection of tech and politics and regulation. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're not, but yet.
Let me ask you one framing question just before you start. So do you think, you've been doing these obviously for a few years, looking ahead, talking about your predictions. Do you feel that there is less clarity in looking forward than usual, or is it just kind of the same and that a lot of the noise that's out there?
There's less, but not in this case. I know we love in this podcast talk about sort of broader societal shifts and norms and things like that. I don't think it's because like our attention span's even worse, whatever. I think it's just because it's all about AI, and AI is still so new, and so many questions are sort of yet to be resolved that it makes everything around it, including regulation, more complicated as a result.
Right. Okay.
So, but I think I put down about a dozen of these. A lot, not all are AI, but quite a few are. So should we just start going through
let's go.
So the first thing, and this is if you're a regular in the podcast, I think something that macro you hear from us a lot, which is regulation of tech and regulation in general, and just sort of government in general, really does not occur in Washington. So very big things happen that have, macro impacts on our lives, interest rates, tariffs, war. But by and large, most of the things that affect the lives of not just real people, but just even real companies is determined by either state government or city government. And in our world, more often than not, it tends to be state government. And the reason why this is relevant is, all of our heads just sort of naturally, when you hear politics, you think of the Capitol building or the White House or a specific person like Trump. You rarely think about like the Speaker of the House in your state, and you don't even know who that person is. Generally, I would argue, even if you listen to this podcast, right? So we're talking now about a pretty nerdy group of people. 80% couldn't tell you who the Speaker of the House is in the state they live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I might take the over on that.
Do you know who the speaker is in the state you live in?
I do, but I'm not remembering his name right now.
Exactly.
But we've talked about it many times.
Yeah,
so I think that means you don't.
Wait, why don't you mention his name?
His name is Carl Hasty. He's an assemblyman from the Bronx.
Everybody, really, his name only really started to surface on the bail reform stuff, where everybody was like, who's responsible for this?
When Shelley Silver was indicted.
Oh, Shelley Silver,
yeah,
right.
He's dead now. But he went to jail.
It was good to have a criminal in that role, because then he got a lot of attention.
Here was the saddest part. For a long time, he was both a criminal and still the most competent, necessary, not just powerful, like the most competent, reasonable person you needed in Albany. Sadly, these things are not mutually exclusive.
Does that mean he was sort of an honest broker in a weird way, or no?
No, because he was the ultimate. It's his fault. I mean, he went to jail.
Right.
But in fairness to him, and this was his defense, New York law, so lawmakers for state government are not, or city government, are not full-time jobs. They are allowed to have other jobs with some limitations, but the limitations are very limited. So, for example, Shelley Silver was a partner at a law firm, and that law firm took all kinds of business from clients who needed things from the state.
Yeah.
And so Shelley was effectively being bribed left and right to make bills happen or not happen.
We're back to that being okay.
Whatever else, right? Turns out he was laying the groundwork for Trump.
Yeah.
But anyway, here's
ahead.
the point.
Yes.
The federal government has not regulated Internet 2.0 yet, right? We still, as listeners know, talk about things like repealing Section 230 all the time. There are some ways in which they will be involved in AI. They will procure AI, especially for things like the Department of Defense or war now. They will build some infrastructure, things like that. But by and large, when it comes to actually how AI will work, that's going to be a state-based function. So in 2025, over 1,000 bills were introduced its state legislatures to regulate AI. There is an estimate. This is not in any way a realistic estimate, but someone threw out there that I think I read in Pluribus News, which is generally a really good outlet for state government stuff, 30,000 bills. So Bob and I both agree that is like wildly overstated. So let's cut it by 90%, right? 3,000. It's like a mind-blowing number, right? So, and if 3,000 bills are run and 10% or 15% pass, there's hundreds and hundreds of bills around the country that are now saying, here's how AI in either generative AI or specific, industries, here's how it must function. So, we're looking at, I think, a tidal wave coming in 2026 of new rules, requirements, mandates, procedures, prohibitions, statutes about AI. So I think a lot's going to happen, and I know that it's sort of much harder to follow what's happening at the state level, but that's where it's going to happen. So that's number one.
Okay.
Yes. Bradley, two points on AI regulation in the states. There's this whole RAISE Act debate currently in New York, awaiting a signature or veto from Governor Hochul. Wondering if you had a take on that. And two, aren't there conversations around the White House maybe doing some executive order forbidding states to do their own AI regulation?
So I'll work them backwards. So the second one, so you're, I think, conflating two things. So there was a provision in one of the drafts of the big, beautiful bill last summer that had a 10-year moratorium on state regulation of AI. That didn't make the final bill and was definitely not constitutional anyway. Not that the Supreme Court necessarily cares anymore, but it's not. Then there was a draft executive order that didn't include that, but attempted to do the same thing, which was, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago, was meant to try to discourage states from passing AI regulations. The order itself was pulled, and beyond that, as we went through, and you can go back and listen to it, it had no teeth. Like once it looked good, and then once you read it piece by piece, and I did shoot the White House David Saxon email telling him that for whatever it's worth. He didn't respond, but the order did get pulled. So my guess is a lot of people
were doing the same thing.
Did the same thing. Yeah. So, but the second thing, and this is something that I'm spending a lot of time on now on the venture side. So, generative AI, for all of the reasons that it is, or at least potentially is so transformational, requires incredible amounts of compute. So the reason why NVIDIA is I haven't checked the market cap recently, but at least like a week ago, it was a $5 trillion company, which is wildly inflated in my view. But putting that aside is because they are the producers of the best GPUs, and those are the processing units that are needed to power AI. To power the GPUs, you need an incredible amount of actual energy. And I spent some time really looking at this over the last week or two, and I'm going to have a column and a podcast on it soon enough. I'm just not there yet. But the estimate is that overall, in areas where there are AI data centers, energy consumption will double. And the problem is energy production is not doubling anytime soon.
Right, and energy prices are going up.
They're already going up. And like if you look at both the New Jersey and Virginia races for governor, electricity prices was a huge issue in both of those, especially Jersey, which I think I just noticed more because it's here. Eventually it might be, and I think I might even be sort of scooping one of our next predictions, but microgrid nuclear could become the way that these are all powered. In fact, Microsoft looked into buying 3 Mile Island, in fact, which is interesting.
It's like almost too scripted, isn't it?
Yeah. But we're a long way away from that, right? Just the financing, the permitting, everything on nuclear, and I believe it should be streamlined, but for purposes of this,
it's long range.
You're going to have these massive spikes in consumer electricity prices. And the problem right now is, from what I can tell, no politicians seem to actually realize this. And they are going to get hit so hard that I think if there's a single issue going forward that will unelect incumbents around America, this is it.
Well, this was something specifically that Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about, which wasn't wrong. Electricity.
Wasn't wrong. And so there are alternate models of compute. The one that got the most attention, if you remember, was a company out of China called DeepSeek, which uses an inference model. So the point of an inference model, which is what it sounds like, rather than using compute and GPUs to sort of every time, if I ask a question and it requires 20 different questions answered to get to my answer, OpenAI will effectively rerun the question 20 different times to get to the answer. An inference model will say, okay, well, if A is true, then B can be based off of A rather than starting over again, and so on. And the real question is an inference model good enough? It's not going to be quite as good.
Or is like a Google search good enough for a lot of stuff, right? I mean, that's the funny thing about AI right now is that like you realize how much people are using it for the most like
mundane stuff.
Mundane state.
For sure. Although that's two reasons, right? So one is because we like new stuff, and it is. So like yesterday, I was just literally doing some math for the consulting business. And I realized that if I just typed in all of my variables into Perplexity, it would get me an answer. I could have done it manually. I usually do it manually, but it got me an answer much faster. But the other thing is Google search has become just like a cesspool, right? It's just like, I don't even mean like
although the AI feature works pretty nicely.
The AI does. I agree. Gemini's not bad. But the overall search results have become, it's just a mess. It just feels like,
it's like what department stores turned into.
Yeah, right. So I think people are sort of turned off by that. But here's the broader regulatory point. I believe that inference models or just other models of compute. So like I think I have NDA, so I won't say it, but I'm in a couple different companies that have different approaches to compute. One is using brain stem cells from rats. We'll see, right? Super early and experimental.
Uses less power, rat brains.
Yeah. Another one has a way to remake a memory chip to make it much more efficient and powerful. And I'm looking at a bunch of others too. From a business standpoint, I would say I find these interesting. If you're a retailer,
do you see breakthroughs in that in the next year?
I don't see breakthroughs in the next year. These are pretty long-term investments for me. Where I think it all comes together is I think what breaks through is the realization by politicians that they're about to all lose their jobs because they're not doing anything about the fact that their constituents' electricity prices are about to double. And the truth is, if you are a normal person that does not vote in most local primaries, which is 90% of us, when people do turn out, it's because they're really upset about something.
But you're talking about something that's going to hit Republicans and Democrats pretty equally then.
For sure. Yeah. And by the way, and it's not an ideological or partisan issue, right? So I could see a world where you start to see legislation that says from states, localities may not issue zoning and permitting to new AI data centers unless it can be shown that there will be no commensurate cost in electricity bills for regular consumers. So I think that will be something that happens, emerges this year. And third was, this could be the big moment for nuclear energy in the U.S. Again, not that we'll start seeing things come online in the next 12 months, but there are startups doing interesting things in nuclear energy. And I think that when we realize, A, AI is not going to go away because of this. We want it. We want the benefits it can provide. And B, politicians at the very least, but consumers even more, don't want to all of a sudden pay a lot more. The need for a new solution will present itself. Some of that need will present itself in the way of different forms of compute, and some of it will present itself in forms of different forms of energy. I also have a thesis that meaning one's position on nuclear energy is shaped by how old they were when 3 Mile Island happened. So 3 Mile Island happened in March of 1979. So I was 5.5 at the time. So I have no recollection of it whatsoever. As a result, I'm very open and friendly to nuclear energy because I don't have any sort of like childhood conception of it being bad. Right. But like I think about like when Andrew Cuomo closed the Indian Point nuclear power plant in Westchester, it's because I think he's 67, so he would have been, if I'm 52, 15, he would have been like 10 or 11 when he would have been like 15 or whatever when it happened. And it was probably formative for him. So therefore, in his mind, like nuclear bad. So the good news is, I looked it up, 78% of Americans were born after 1960. I made 10 years old as sort of the baseline for this. So we're born after 1969.
Right.
So therefore, our collective memory of 3 Mile Island is diminished considerably. And I think as that goes away more and more, the openness to nuclear will grow commensurately.
Okay.
All right, number 4, mental health chatbots will get wrongly banned. So, and when I say wrongly, let me explain this a little bit. So last year, Illinois and Nevada both banned mental health chatbots, and the reason why is that some of the chatbots gave advice that led to suicide. And the feeling was, how could we possibly allow technology to exist that might, in the name of trying to help people, actually induces them to kill themselves? Now, I mentioned this to my therapist. I was curious what she said. She said, there are 50,000 suicides every year in the U.S. The therapists never get held accountable. So holding a chatbot accountable, that really does not make any sense. It's sort of like, there's 40,000 people die in the U.S. every year in a car accident, like every 15 minutes, something like that. And at the same time, if like a Waymo crosses a double yellow line, it's a front page story, right? Same kind of thing here. But the broader point to me is we live in a world where mental illness is rising for 2 reasons. One, because I think the pace of change is so rapid that it is extraordinarily stressful for people. Mm-hmm. But 2, it's an awareness thing, right? The more we become aware of the different ways that our brain chemistry works and different challenges that we each have, and the need for, at the very least, most human beings would say, some hate therapy, but a lot would say, yeah, having someone, it could be a mental health professional or Catholics been going to confession forever, someone to talk to about my concerns is helpful, right? I think most people would say that, right? Yeah. So the number of therapists available and the cost of it compared to the number of people who could benefit from it, obviously there's a wild disparity. And to me, if AI can help people feel heard, listened to, seen a little better, we want that, right?
Of course.
So to just go ban it is stupid.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we should regulate it. I don't have any investments in the space. I'm not working in the space, so I don't have a particular set of legislative language that would sort of provide the proper regulation without banning it, but we could come up with it. I know that you can do it. So to me, however, since I've talked to some of the companies in the space, and politically they are fucking clueless. And if you combine their cluelessness...
They're clueless on the regulatory sort of challenge.
And they still, I remember one company still is working in the world of well, if I raise so much money, I must be a genius at everything kind of thing, right? So...
your favorite type.
Yeah. So they're going to lose.
Yeah.
Which means this stuff's going to get banned, and it's going to be ultimately what sounds like... And I get why a politician's going to vote for the ban, because you don't want to be the person responsible for votes.
And you're going to have that odd story here or there that makes it look like the worst thing going.
But in reality, it's going to happen. So I think there's at least 7 states right now taking it up, big states, and it's going to hurt people. Or at least prevent something that could help people.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you could ban a mental health chatbot provided by a healthcare provider, but then someone could just go on ChatGPT and go down.
It could, but
guardrails,
but those companies, I think, partly in response to this and partly just because they're trying to minimize both risk and bad press, have been really limiting their kind of medical advice in general. We're in a company called Doctronic that is kind of a medical advisor. They're not doctors, but they're medical. They kind of, you can go in there and say, my finger hurts, and it'll help you figure out why and then what to do, including connecting you to the right kind of doctor if you need it. I think those are the companies that are going to end up, not unlike on this How to Create Societal Change app that we're working on. I would love, once we're done building the code, to have that integrated into the open AIs of the world so more people can use it. We're going to be told, no, we can't. It's political. And then, we'll have to figure out whether they'd be willing to link to us or something.
Yeah.
Hugo, what were you going to say?
No, I just think it's interesting how often you already bump up against things that ChatGPT won't do. It's just going to get much, much more complicated and worse.
Yeah, and I get it, because they're living in a world of uncertain regulation. Now they're working very hard to try to minimize any regulation of them whatsoever. And look, I don't know Sam Altman, but I do know the person there that runs all of their kind of regulatory government stuff. And I am not under the impression that they are working towards the benefit of society. They're working towards the benefit of their own personal wealth, and that's it. So generally speaking, I am skeptical of ChatGPT's and OpenAI's intentions.
Okay.
All right, number five. States challenge the CFTC for regulatory authority over prediction sports betting markets. So we've talked about prediction markets before, so think Polymarket, Kalshi, companies like that. Right now, the way it works is those companies are licensed federally, not by the states. And the reason they're licensed federally is they have successfully made the case that when you are making a prediction on one of those platforms, it is a contract and it's a commodity as a result. And commodities are regulated by the CFTC, and therefore it's federal. That is much better for these companies because
that's a sound ruling in your view? Commodities.
Well, that's
like
what I think is going to. Well, that's what I think is going to come into play. So
right.
No, not necessarily, and that's where I think this is going to get much more complicated.
Okay.
So much better if you're the company because you have one regulator instead of 50. Better tax rates. You don't have licensing fees. All kinds of stuff. Right. So it's infinitely a.
You get Don Jr. on your board.
Correct.
You got no problems.
Right. States, of course, want to be able to regulate and license and tax prediction market companies because, one, they want the revenue, but two, they believe that at the very least, the sports betting activities and prediction markets are the same as sports betting from the FanDuels and DraftKings of the world.
Which they are.
And therefore, those are under the regulatory jurisdiction of the states, not the federal government. So PASPA.
Right.
So that was a federal law passed, I forget when, but that said that states cannot allow sports betting.
So this is a fight, and you see this working out in favor of the states, or you don't know?
We don't know. I think what's going to happen is you have now states have sued to say this is our jurisdiction. In some courts, the federal government has won. Recently in Maryland, the state won. Mm-hmm. Typically under this scenario, it eventually makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and they will decide. It is interesting to think about what the Supreme Court will decide here because based on their own precedent in PASPA, which was only like 7-8 years ago, combined with a 6-3 conservative majority, typically speaking, states' rights are something that they lean into, and therefore you take those two things and you would think they would say this does belong to the states, not to the federal government. However, as you said, Don Jr. is on a board, and Trump's clearly got various interests in prediction markets, and the Supreme Court seems terrified of Trump. And at the very least, Alito seems like he is, like a staffer for Trump.
In our lifetime, have we ever seen a Supreme Court that seemed to have such a particular feeling about the president? I mean, I feel like it still shocks me every time you read a new analysis.
Not that I can. I'm sitting here trying to think. I think there are probably times where.
I thought they like to stick it to the president.
Well, I think there are times where a president appointed the chief justice,
right?
Which, by the way, doesn't have to be. I always thought that like someone new would come in and be nominated as chief justice. You can actually nominate someone to be an associate justice and then move up in existing to be chief justice. So I'm sure that there are all kinds of books and stuff on papers on the times of alignment and disalignment, but I've never seen anything like this.
Okay.
So anyway, do I think that this will get resolved by the Supreme Court in 2026? Probably not, but I think that it is going to sort of keep becoming more and more of an issue. And
the battle lines are going to get clear.
Yeah, and you were seeing, like in New York, for example, legislation got filed to prohibit prediction market betting for politics. Now, arguably, the state has no say over that right now. So anyway, I think it's all going to come to a head.
Okay.
All right, number 6. EdTech. I think EdTech evolves beyond technology in the classroom. So we talked briefly last week about AI as a teaching tool and sort of our idea around a version of Race to the Top to promote and pay for the use of AI in the classroom to both overcome the teachers' union's oppositions and the impossible situation of an AI classroom company trying to somehow sell their product to 15,000 school districts across the country. But I think you can see more than that. So in 2025, 8 states, Texas, Tennessee, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, Wyoming, Idaho, Indiana, all advance their school choice programs, which provide funding for parents to send their kids to non-public school options like charter schools or parochial schools or private schools instead of the local public school. Those programs then become tech marketplaces that connect students, education providers, and the state. And those marketplaces are run by ed tech startups. And I will disclose that we are the investors in Odyssey, which is the leading company in the space. We led their Series A, and I sit on their board. So obviously I'm very, very involved in this issue. More is going to happen in part because we're running legislation in some states. We're working on RFPs, and it is succeeding, and it's becoming more and more popular. And it makes sense, which is, look, people vote with their feet. Right, and that could be people move from one jurisdiction to another. They start using AI search instead of Google because Google becomes not that good anymore. And a lot of public schools across the country are really not good enough. And parents are saying, if I have the option to do something else, I want to do so. So that's going to grow. Also, for the same reason, if you combine that with the growing distrust of the value of a 4-year liberal arts degree, which is increasing, and by the way, perhaps validly so. I tend to agree with that the model we have is wildly economically inefficient because since we make students take out massive loans for it, to spend 4 years and get a degree that doesn't necessarily help you find a profession when you can go to a vocational school and do it for 1 or 2 years, pay far less, and they actually help you get a job. There's a big difference. In the past, and this is sort of the point here, vocational schools were seen as, very blue collar, HVAC, plumbing, and that's really changing a lot. To me, sort of I haven't seen this yet, but I think it could be, which is lawyers used to be that you would train with a barrister and then you take some sort of test and then you get the wig and you're a barrister, right? Now, 4 years of college, 3 years of law school, the bar exam, all this shit, right? You don't need any of that stuff. So I think that ed tech companies working in the vocational space will continue to grow. There will be more and more money moving towards vocational. Again, as a disclosure, we also led the Series A, a company called Lumion, which is the leading company that kind of works with vocational schools for their operating systems for things like enrollment, tuition, alumni tracking. So I'm pretty aware of it as a result, but I think that trend's going to grow. All right, number 7. Governments will start to use AI more. So if you remember when Doge very first was announced, so just about a year
Feels
ago
like a long time ago.
Yeah. The place where I was quite excited, wrongly, but was excited, was the notion of, perfect. Elon has Grok and XAI. He understands AI. Even Tesla's AI, effectively. Mm-hmm. This will be the adoption by the federal government and hopefully leading to other governments of AI for its own purposes, right? And that didn't happen. Instead, they just started firing people without knowing anything. It was a fucking disaster beyond belief, and Elon had to.
Why don't you think it happened?
Because I think that they got so caught up in draining the swamp and purging the government of anyone who's disloyal to Trump and reducing the size of the federal workforce, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just the way they went about it was idiotic. Because they assumed that most of those employees are union members and Democrats and all of that.
They just love the theatrics of it.
Yeah, and the theatrics, right. But if you think about it, procurement, compliance, data management, facilities management, there are so many systems that are effectively performed by middle managers in government right now at every level that could be performed by AI itself that would be both better and cheaper. And look, obviously, if you lay off a government worker because you replace their function with AI, it creates the same societal challenge as someone who works at a private company. Sure. However, if I said to either of you, your tax dollars can go to administrative overhead and functions or programs that actually help people, it's going to be 99 to 1 the latter.
And as you've said repeatedly, the innovation here is going to come from the cities and states.
Yeah, and so I think this year we will start to see much more adoption of this stuff, maybe more in red cities.
Mamdani, do you think will be behind this? Or
no, I'd like him to be, and we talked this briefly. So, he's walking into a $5 billion budget deficit. The city, from the research I did, which is not exhaustive in the slightest, has something like at least 30,000 kind of middle managers out of about a 330,000 person workforce.
30,000
I think it's much higher than that. Who, to me, long term, most of them could be replaced by AI, and the billions and billions of dollars you spend on them could instead be directed to free buses or childcare or all this housing, whatever, all the stuff he wants to do that would actually help people. Now, again, you then would have unemployed people, and so I'm not diminishing that. So if Mamdani looked at it really closely and he was presented with the choice of middle management or the stuff you care about, he'd pick, I assume, the latter. The problem is one, he'll have all kinds of union issues, and he won't want to get into that. Progressives will instinctively oppose it because they love unions and they hate technology. And also, let's say you're Mamdani. If you started the work today, you start to see the savings in a couple of years, right? In fact, in year one, you might not save anything at all because you have to bring in all of the stuff. But if he is mayor for 8 years, then he would definitely benefit from it. So, all right, number 8 is biometric screening becomes mandated. So Roblox, and they did this on their own, this wasn't a mandate, but they recently announced that they would use biometric screening to protect users, in their case, kids, from anyone wishing their harm, in this case, creepy adults. New York City is requiring City Bike, thanks to Cory's work and some of my work, to strengthen its age verification. I don't know. I got to check in with Mastro about that. I'll do that today, actually. To rent an e-bike, I think biometric screening is the most obvious way to do it. I just think, generally speaking, that we are about to start seeing a trend in the increase of requirements for biometric screening. And the reason why I think politically it will be easy to do is it is literally how we now all open our phones. I just don't think that it is an issue for most. Number 9, this one's very New York City, though Bob says Chicago and a few other places too, centric, which is drones will be used to inspect buildings. So as listeners know, I hate the scaffolding in New York City. We successfully helped run a campaign in March that led to city council legislation that now doubles the length of time before inspections are needed, so that you just need less scaffolding, and cuts the length of time for inspections in half, and I think tripled fines. Great start, but the reality is, for most inspections, maybe for the building work itself, it's different. For the inspections, drones can do this, right? So, and I have talked to Zoran about that, and he seemed to be really into it. You need some sort of air traffic management system to do it. I don't have any investments in that space. There are a couple of companies that do it. They don't do it for this because no one's doing it yet, but I don't think it is that hard to do. I think it's just recoding existing software. And I think that, in any kind of vertical city, or even, most major American cities have at least a vertical downtown area, whether it's 4 blocks or, in New York's case, 100.
And it's a kind of exciting new skill too, right? I mean, to have these new whole sort of fleet.
So
of
I think it'll
drone
happen,
operators.
and I actually think Mamdani will do it, because I think it'd be a cool thing that would be, sometimes in politics and government, you can do really big, meaningful things that unfortunately no one ever actually notices or credits you for.
Right.
And sometimes you can do small things like this, but that are very symbolic and visual and will feel good to people. And this is one of those. If I were Mamdani, I would definitely put this in my state of the city. Number 10. The convergence of the abundance movement in tech. Now, just to be clear for listeners, I use the phrase abundance a lot on this podcast, not in the context of where it's meant here. I use it in the context of an abundance mindset, meaning when we feel happy when we have purpose and meaning, and that usually means doing something nice for somebody else, and that is abundance. The idea is that it's not everyone for themselves, it's everyone benefits when everyone benefits. In this case, abundance means specifically removing barriers to constructing affordable housing, popularized by a book called Abundance by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein last spring. And I think that the YIMBY movement is really making a lot of ground in cities and states, and there's just a lot of tech that could enhance it. So modular construction, prefabrication, ADUs, structural insulated panels, envelope systems, 3D printed homes. There's just so many different things that could meaningfully improve construction. What it would require is changing some of the underlying rules, because at the very least, in blue cities and states, if you have to use traditional construction unions who don't want technology because the goal is to get as much work in as many hours as possible, they fight it. If those rules go out the window because the affordability of the project itself is the most important thing, because in a place like New York City, we don't have affordable housing because it is too expensive to build affordable housing. So I think that we will see a lot of movement around that issue, and then we'll see that kind of tech. Number 11, I think cannabis and psychedelics will both advance. So cannabis had a pretty rough 2025. Federal legislation rarely does pass, but in this case it did. It bans synthetic cannabinoids like Delta-8, Delta-9, THCA. But in May of this year, the Department of Justice and DEA published a rulemaking notice to remove cannabis from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. That might get done in 2026. There was a moratorium, of course, placed on it. But if it were to happen, it would, for the cannabis industry, it would mean taxation changes, federal tax rates could get lowered, medical research would get easier, better access to banking and credit. So if you were in the cannabis startup world, that's meaningful. And then also on the psychedelic side, Bobby Kennedy, the HHS secretary, has repeatedly expressed support for the medicinal value of psychedelics. Now, there was a rejection by the FDA of, I think it was MDMA last year, but I think that had been in the works for a long time before Kennedy really got his hooks in. I think that if he were to make this a big priority, you would see accelerated FDA pathways, more clinical deployment for veterans, which is something he's talked about a lot, decriminalization.
Do you see him sort of taking a cause and really sticking with it as opposed to just planning bombs?
I don't know him personally, but yes.
You do?
I think he's crazy, but I think he believes in the things that he believes in genuinely, and therefore, if he were to decide, hey, this is my thing, I think that they could make a lot of progress.
Where do you think MAGA is on psychedelics?
Well, if MAGA and MAHA are one and the same, which I suspect people who know those worlds really well will tell me they're not.
Right.
But to the extent that there's overlap, MAGA is interesting, right? Because they're not. If you were libertarian, you should be for psychedelics, right? You should say, okay.
Well, MAGA is not libertarian,
right? But a lot of people who are in MAGA before Trump would have described themselves, I think, as libertarian, and then that
Republicans might have, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Republicans who have a libertarian bent, even if now it is all in furtherance of the best interests of Donald Trump personally, in theory, if they thought about it, should be okay with psychedelics. And by the way, if it helps people, why not, right?
Yeah.
And finally, politicians using technology to imitate other politicians, right? So early, and we've taught this before, but if you look at kind of modern American political history, this is probably true, even not just modern, whether it was JFK realized the potential of television, or Obama and texting, or Trump and Twitter in 2015-16, or Mamdani and short-form video this year, those politicians who recognize it early and are kind of naturals for it do really well. They benefit from it considerably. Then media notices it and writes about it. Then politicians, staffers, consultants say, oh, we all got to do this. And we saw Andrew Cuomo in the general election try to imitate Mamdani very, very painfully. So the point of this last one is a little tongue-in-cheek, which is it will be highly entertaining to now watch Republican and Democrat candidates in 2026 for office at every level of government desperately try to be appealing on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. Yeah. And there are some for whom it will feel native and genuine, and it'll work really well. But those ones are already they know that already. They're doing it. Right. And the rest are just going to be like, you can come up with the greatest blooper reel of all time of this guy's doing. So it should be fun. So anyway, those are our predictions. And you know what? That's all we have time for today.
Well, we want to do your recommendation.
Okay.
And I want to ask you one thing about a recommendation. But go ahead. What's your recommendation for the
My recommendation is the show Landman.
Okay.
And it is Billy Bob Thornton, and it's about a landman as the person that kind of runs the oil field production in a place, this case, Midland, Texas. And it is somehow both an incredibly engrossing show and bad in many ways. Like, it's interesting. It's one of those shows where you have characters who are really appealing and interesting. You have characters that feel like ChatGPT wrote their lines, and somehow they both coexist in the same show. So, like, there's this lawyer and she is like, give us the stereotype of the most aggressive, young, annoying lawyer possible, and that her lines are horrible. But then Billy Bob, who's a really good actor, is great. John Hamm is great. So I also have an affinity for Texas in general. So if you like Texas and you like Billy Bob Thornton, you like the show.
Have you watched Death by Lightning?
I watched the first episode and a half, and
So this is the show about about President Garfield and his assassination.
Yeah, I liked it. I don't know why I stopped watching it.
You just watched one?
I watched one, but I would maybe a little bit of the second one. I would return to it. Did you watch it?
It's funny. I had the exact same process. I watched the first one, and I was like, oh, that was good, but I wasn't like, oh my God, I got to watch the next one.
I also did watch that movie Jake Kelly yesterday. That's the George Clooney, Adam Sandler, Billy Crudup movie. on
Billy
Netflix.
Crudup
It was. No, he's not back. He's on the morning show. He's a big star. I don't watch. I don't watch the morning show.
Was that movie good?
He's on it. It's okay.
Yeah,
It's like a 6
I heard
out
it was
of 10.
not good.
It's fine.
I
But it was
care.
Noah Baumbach. So, I mean, you had all these big names. I suspect Netflix.
Do you like
paid
Noah
his own-
Baumbach just sort of overall?
No, it's too depressing.
Yeah.
I don't. It's like, well, I don't need.
It feels
these
like
problems.
he's settling scores with people in his life all the time.
That's probably a lot of art, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it is, but it's more explicit. So you feel like he's maybe settling it with you in a weird way.
Well, you specifically, I know he's got issues with. So a lot of it's about Hugo.
I don't.
If you don't like Hugo, you'll love Noah Baumbach.
I don't like Noah Baumbach because when I was like 12 years old, I actually auditioned for the Squid and the Whale.
No shit.
Wow.
I didn't know you were a child actor.
It was the only audition I ever did.
And you didn't.
You didn't get it.
I didn't get it. But it was the only. It was the only. Did
you enjoy
What might have
It
been?
lasted like 30 seconds. Walked in, read one. Like it was.
What made you choose to do it?
I don't know. I think I was like taking acting classes, and then they had this thing like back, some magazine where you could see like what you could audition for, and I was like, oh, I fit this. But no, it was like 30
Were you
seconds.
in like all the school plays?
Of course, but like,
cool.
I don't know why. I have like such a vivid memory of
So it
like
was
my
for the-
Squid and the Whale.
For the kid?
For the kid, yeah.
But for the main kid role.
Yeah.
For the kid, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it was
I mean,
only
the odds
thing
of
I
someone
ever
who would
auditioned
never
for.
acted
So now I don't
professionally
like
probably
Noah Baumbach.
wasn't
No,
that
I don't-
likely. But
and
it's cool. It's really cool that you tried. And it's
Thank you.
awesome. Yeah.
My recommendation, because I did not recognize any of the movies you mentioned, was I saw Zootopia 2.
How was it? Why
Excellent.
Did you take a child?
I went with my friends, my mid-30s-year-old
Were you
friend.
really high or something?
No, I was
Okay.
because I like well-done animated movies. Zootopia 1, as like most Disney movies, is really great, and Zootopia 2 is equally great.
All right, Zootopia 2. All right.
There we go.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye. Firewall is recorded at my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytuss.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.